All right. Hey there. Welcome to this MS101 Introduction to Operations Orders, or OPORDs, and Terrain Models. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS at the University of Montana Grizzly Battalion, and I'm going to be leading you through this lesson today. Now, I want you to take note, this is considered a supplemental lesson, so it's not actually part of the MSL101 curriculum through ROTC. However, depending on how your program designs its labs, I've made this to maybe make it a little bit easier for you to understand what's going on when you go to some of those tactical squad training labs. So this particular lesson is going to help you understand what the operations order process is, just give you the basic fundamentals of military orders, as well as talk a little bit about how those terrain models, those 3D replicas that you see out in the field, how those are made and what those need to entail. Now, I do recommend that you have out a piece of paper or a pen, maybe a Word doc open off to the side to take some notes. And then if you're familiar with any of my videos, you already know that that QR code right there on the title slide will take you to a live website version of this exact same lesson. Now, there's multiple benefits to that. Number one being that there's some embedded links and videos in this lesson that I'm going to lead you through. And if you have that open on your own, you can actually click on those links to get to some additional read-aheads or other resources just for some more in-depth learning. And also, depending on when you're watching this, it's being recorded in October of 2024. If you're viewing this in a later school year, there may have been some slight changes to how we do things. And so that QR code is going to take you to the most updated version of this lesson. Now with that, like I said, there's some embedded links and other videos that you're welcome to check out. That student read ahead there is going to cover the operations order and military orders themselves. And that second read ahead there is going to talk about terrain models and rehearsals. Now, I also have two videos embedded into this. One, a screencast that I did prior on terrain models and sand table rehearsals, which is actually part of the MS2 curriculum. And I've also embedded a video there, linked it, that we're going to watch together during this lesson. So let's get right into it. By the end of this time with me, what I hope you're able to do is explain the advantages and the disadvantages of both verbal and written orders. I want you to be able to understand the three types of orders. I want you to be able to explain the operations order itself, as well as be able to review and understand the purpose and characteristics of the OPORD. Then I want you to be able to discuss the 5 paragraphs of the OPORD and understand the very basics of assembling a terrain model. So going into it, let's talk about military orders. Now, on the military side, they can be verbal, so spoken. They can be written down or even typed out, or they can even be signaled. Now, we're going to be focusing on the verbal and written types of orders. Signaled, the best way to think about that is like hand and arm signals, right? If we put up the hand and arm signal of halt, that is technically an order to whoever is behind that person to stop. Now, the technique of which way you're going to go with your military order is going to really be the discretion of the commander or the leader of the element. And that's going to depend on the time that you have and the situation that you face. We also know that orders convey instructions, right, from a superior to a subordinate. So orders come from the top down. And one thing I want you to remember is that when you are given an order from maybe an advanced course cadet in your program, they're likely receiving it from their cadre or an additional advanced course cadet. So just keep that in mind that typically the orders that we're receiving at the most junior level are coming from way higher than the person giving us that order. Now, when we're talking about the OPORD or most orders that are given out, there's this thing called the 5-paragraph format. And that's the standard for how these orders are built. So take, for example, the operations order or the OPORD. The 5 paragraphs in that are the situation, mission, execution, sustainment, and command and signal. Now, we know that we love mnemonics in the Army to remember all these things. So one that you can use to remember this that I've used my entire career is sergeants major eat sugar cookies. That's how you can remember the order of these paragraphs, because the order of an OPORD actually matters. Now let's talk some advantages and disadvantages. Like I said, the person leading the element gets to decide if it's going to be verbal or written, and that's going to depend on the time you have and the situation that you face. Now, just a spoken order to people has the advantage of being used when you're operating in an extremely time-constrained environment. You don't have to utilize the time to write things out. You can just speak it. Therefore, it's good for rapid distribution, getting it from me to you to the people that you're in charge of. Now, one of the disadvantages of this is that it risks important information being completely overlooked or misunderstood. Take the analogy of the game telephone. I don't know if you've ever played that before, but the premise behind that is there's a line of people in a room and one person whispers a statement to the next person, and that person whispers it to the person after them, and it goes all the way through the room to the end. The likelihood of the last person stating the exact same statement that the first person told the second person is pretty slim. So use that analogy to understand that verbal orders can oftentimes miss information. It can be misconstrued, it can be misunderstood and pushed out in a different way than was intended. Now, when it comes to written orders, the advantages there is that you can use both text and graphics, so things like overlays and symbols. They complement the written portion of a bigger plan or another order. They focus on clarity, accuracy, and brevity. It shortens the time needed to actually gather people and brief the orders, because a written one you can just send out to all the people. You don't have to spend the time to bring them all together into one circle or one room. And if you have to edit them, if you do it electronically, it's really easy to just get right in there and delete, and retype or modify what you need to. Now, one of the big disadvantages to written orders is electronically, they can become really big without any added value to it. So now let's talk the three types of military orders. The one that we're really focused on with this is that one in the middle, the operations order. But before that comes what we call a warning order, or a WARNORD. You might also hear it called a WARNO. After that comes a fragmentary order, or a FRAGORD, also known as a FRAGO. Now, a warning order is considered a preliminary notice of an order or an action to follow. So you can see on there on the right that I had shortened it up to, it's a heads up. Hey, this is coming. It does follow a 5-paragraph format as well, with basically the 5 W's and the very basic information that you need to give to your subordinates to get them moving and prepared for the full operation order coming out. Now, the operations order, or the OPORD, is that full directive that's issued by a commander or a leader of an element to their subordinate commanders for the purpose of effecting the coordinated execution of an operation. It's basically all of the information that you need from start to finish to complete a mission. Now, that FRAGO, or fragmentary order, is an abbreviated operation order that's used to put out changes or modifications to an order. We call that the FRAGO, and just say that's the change, because we all know that plans and missions are going to have things come up, and we might have to make a change to what we initially pushed out. So what I want you to remember here is that a WARNO comes first, then the OPORD, and then FRAGOs if necessary for changes to that OPORD. All right, so let's focus on the OPORD itself here. The actual definition of an OPORD is that it's a directive issued by a commander or leader of an element to their subordinates for the purpose of effecting the coordinated execution of an operation. Essentially, bosses tell their people what to do and how to do it. Now, commanders issue OPORDs to direct the execution of long-term operations, as well as execution of discrete short-term operations within the framework of a long-range op order. Essentially, that just means that a large OPORD can contain several smaller OPORDs. That gets a little bit more confusing, but as you move through the ROTC program, you'll understand that just a little bit better. Right now, just focus on the idea of what an OPORD is in general. All right, so what are the purpose and characteristics of these orders? Well, for the OPORD, it conveys instructions in a very standard, clear, and simple format. Remember, there's the 5 paragraphs, and it's standardized that way. Its purpose is also to focus your subordinates' activities. So it's telling them what they need to be doing in order to accomplish this mission. It also, once you give it, allows those subordinates to start preparing their supporting orders that they have to push out to their people. It does pull in the instructions from your higher commander's orders as well, and it provides tasks, activities, constraints, and all coordinating instructions that are necessary for your mission accomplishment. Now, the general characteristics when we think of the OPORD, they need to include critical facts. They need to be written or spoken in an authoritative and positive expression way. They need to be clear and concise. They need to be complete. Of course, they need to be flexible because things change. And they need to be timely. And in follow-on lessons, you'll learn about the 1/3, 2/3 rule and what times those OPORD orders need to actually be given, but that's not a focus for today. So what does the OPORD look like? Well, like I said, it's got the 5 paragraphs: situation, mission, execution, sustainment, command, and signal. Now this chart here is going to show you kind of the basics of what falls into each paragraph, but it's not all encompassing. A full op order, like one that you'll be writing in later years, that has a lot of information that'll be broken down in future lessons and as you move through your ROTC career. What you need to know about the situation is that it talks about the enemy forces, your friendly forces, and any attachments and detachments. So people that you have attached from other elements or people of yours that you've detached out to other elements. Now the mission is very simple. While it's called a paragraph, it's actually a single statement that talks about the 5 W's of the operation. It needs to include the who, the what, when, where, and why. Now, doctrinally or traditionally, we do consider the mission to be something that we have to state twice. So you'll hear it said once, and then you should hear I say again, and then you'll hear it repeated. But that's the entire mission paragraph of the OPORD. Now the execution, that's your bread and butter. That's the guidance that includes your commander's intent, so what that commander believes the ultimate conditions that have to be met for success of the mission. But even bigger, it includes the concept of the operation, or the CONOP. And this is the how. How are we going to accomplish this mission? That's where you'll see things like your terrain model come out, and you'll see pieces and parts moving and the full explanation of who's doing what from start to finish of an operation. Now the sustainment, the 4th paragraph, that is going to explain the logistical methods and any supplies that are necessary for you to actually execute this operation. And then your command and signal, or the last paragraph, is going to list the operational succession of command. So if the main commander goes down, who's in charge after that, who's in charge after that, etc. And also any of the communication procedures that are necessary. So that'll include your frequencies, your call signs, your passwords, and your PACE plan, which is a communications plan that's broken down into your primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency radio or communication operations. Now you'll see there in the bottom that while there's 5 paragraphs, the mission and execution are considered the most important section of the entire OPORD because of their operational task and purpose of what we're doing, why, and then the guidance that articulate the operational execution, so the how. So while you've got your 5 W's in the mission, the how is found in the execution. Now that's not to say that the situation, sustainment, and command and signal aren't important, but just understand that the planning phase really needs to focus on your mission and execution paragraphs. Now to break this down a little simpler for the MS1 level, the paragraphs on the left are going to answer the questions on the right. So the situation should tell you what's going on around you. The mission is going to say, what are we doing? The execution is, how are we going to do it? Sustainment should answer, how do we get supply and other support? And then your command and signal paragraph should tell you who's in charge and how are we going to talk to each other. So let's think about this. As we're moving out of the op order and moving into things like terrain models, think about a time that you might have driven long distance. and you didn't pre-program into your Google Maps or whatever GPS you use any kind of needed services like gas stations, hospitals, restaurants, ATMs, or maybe some sort of auto mechanic. Now, I don't know about you, maybe I'm old school, but I like to pre-program that stuff. I live in Montana where there are hours and hours of highway with no service. And I need to know just in case I need an auto mechanic or I need to get to the hospital. I like to pre-program that stuff so that I can have a way to get there in case I don't have service. So why do you think it would be important to actually plan ahead the full driving or even walking route before you depart on a long journey? Now, if you had a time where you didn't pre-program and stuff went wrong, how might that situation have turned out differently if you had pre-programmed any of those points of interest, like gas stations, restaurants, or ATMs? Now, just think about that for a little bit and how it plays into knowing exactly what to expect in case things change along a route. So how are those points of interest in a GPS like the items that you might have in what we call a terrain model kit? Now, a terrain model kit is going to be either a self-made or purchased little pouch possibly, or a bag. It's some sort of item that has a bunch of little items in it for you to design your terrain model. Now, why do you think it's important for leaders to know how to build their terrain model kits and then construct a terrain model? Now, building a TMK is like, if you want to do, I call it arts and crafts. If you want to go and pull resources, little G.I. Joe, G.I. Jane figures, maybe some colored yarn, maybe you've got little pieces and parts of paper, index cards, things like that that you can throw into a little pouch and use if you're told to build a terrain model. So why would it be important for you to know how to build your own kit and how to take that to construct a terrain model? Well, having a visual representation of your area of operation, or the AO, for a mission briefing can make it a lot easier to understand both the geographical location and any points of interest, in addition to those unit locations and their movement. So what do you need in order to build an effective terrain model? It's not as complicated as you think. All you need are skills, tools, and time. You don't necessarily need a bunch of fancy resources or cutouts or colored yarn. Really, all you need is whatever it takes to make your most junior enlisted or junior officer, the most junior person in your element, understand what's about to happen. And that could take just a boot, some twigs, and the dirt. You do have to make sure you have the time to build it, the tools available to build it, even at the most basic functional level, and the skills to understand how to properly build it to be most effective. All right, so let's talk those TMKs, or your terrain model kits. Now there's two types. There's prefabbed or prefabricated, and there's field expedient. Prefabricated you can buy in a store or online, places like Amazon, and in those kits it's going to differ depending on the manufacturer or even the date of the manufacturer. So if you were to buy one at like an Army surplus store, what's in it will depend on how old it is or what time of conflict it's coming from. On Amazon, you can purchase TMKs. There's a lot of different options out there, and then you can add on to later or buy other resources to put into it. I personally just went to like hobby stores and craft stores and bought a lot of stuff back when I was in ROTC, and I actually still have one of my kits today to kind of create this prefabricated idea. Now the field expedient, that's assembled by the individual. So you build it yourself, and it's really consistent of on-hand materials that you can find at your location. So let's say you're up in the mountains, you can use rocks, moss, twigs, leaves, dirt, things like that. You could also pull things from your unit supply. So you can see in that bottom right photo, there's some boxes there, some cardboard, looks like some engineer tape, some duct tape, a couple rocks, and then using the dirt to design it. It's very basic and quick. That's the idea behind a field expedient. It's the stuff that you can pull together quick to create your terrain model. Now there's advantages and disadvantages to both. What works for you might not work for somebody else, but I encourage you to go out, take a look at what some of those prefabbed ones contain online, see if you want to start building your own. And I always encourage people to start now, regardless of where you are in ROTC, to create something that you can just fit into your assault pack or your cargo pocket to utilize later, because you never know when you're going to be called upon to build the terrain model. And it's a lot easier to build a terrain model with items from your own TMK that you know you have than searching through somebody else's TMK that you might not have any idea what's already in there. All right, so we're going to watch a quick video together that's going to go over the actual step-by-step pieces of constructing a terrain model. While you're watching this, I want you to keep in mind the different steps that this cadet takes, what order they go in, and what they include when they're constructing this terrain model.
What's going on, guys? I'm out here to show you guys how to put all the pieces together. Right here, I have my terrain model kit. And I'm going to take all the pieces and show you guys how to assemble a terrain model kit. First things first, you want to look at the map and do a map recon. You want to look at the area of operations that you guys are going to be in, look at the grid, and kind of look at what kind of terrain you have. Here I can see I have hills, I have a lake, and I have dense vegetation. So when I start my TMK, I always start with the grid lines. That way I kind of have a canvas to begin making the terrain model. All right, so we've got some 550 cord. Take your rope, cut it. What we're going to do is we're going to gut the inside, this white stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to pull this white stuff out. So you got the 550. All right, next we're going to build the grid points. So on our map, we're going to do a 2x2. All right, here I have some sticks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dig them to the ground. All right, as you can see, I use the sticks as the corners of the grid. If the sticks aren't stick to the ground, I use a knife to cut the sticks so it's a little bit sharper and you can shove them to the ground easier. Next, I'm using the guts of the 550 cord as grid lines. I'm tying them around each stick. I'm not using any fancy knots. I'm just tying it just enough so it doesn't fall or fly away. Pretty simple and straightforward here. It doesn't have to be perfect squares, but you want to get as close to perfect as possible. Next, you're going to build the blow up. So this is going to be basically just one square, really big. We'll go into more detail on this later. Next, you want to develop the terrain using a shovel or your hands. So I'm using an entrenchment tool here to build the hills and kind of shape the terrain so it matches the map. Right here, you can see that I just built like a saddle, built on the hilltop. As you see right here, there's a hill here, hilltop here, here, and then here's a kind of a saddle looking thing. Next, what you want to do is add some color to this place. I'm using the blue for water. Here you can see there's a lake, and over here there's gonna be like a river. Next, I'm gonna use black for man-made objects. So here there's gonna be a road, and then there's gonna be another road pointing out the other way. If you have time, you can also label this road and label the lake and river. Next, I'm using green leaves as vegetation. So I know it's gonna be dense vegetation over here because I looked at the map. So I'm adding all these leaves to represent how dense the vegetation is going to be. Step 7, what you want to do is add your TMK pieces. Kind of place them where you're going to be during the operation. So you can see the enemy's going to be there. You're going to see the assembly area over here. Step 8, you come to the sooner, but I'm going to label the grid coordinates. So I'm going to label the coordinates in accordance to the map. Over here, 0, 1, 0, 2, and next going to be 0, 3. And you also want to label the vertical axes as well. Step 9, you want to write as much detail as you can on the TMK pieces. So on the primary route, I'm adding the distance, direction. On the assembly area, I'm adding the grid coordinates. On the objective, I'm labeling the name. On the ORP, I'm going to write the grid location. You want to add as much detail as possible so that everyone can understand what's going on. Next.
All right, so that was kind of a quick and down and dirty of how to construct that terrain model. And I hope you're able to kind of figure out what the point of this terrain model really is. Now, why do we do it? It's supposed to be a full 3D replica of your area of operations. So you take your map, like you said, you go through it and you look at what that terrain looks like, and you're using those grid lines and those different labeled grid lines to give people a larger 3D visual of the area that they're actually going to be moving in. So that's why you'll see that during labs. And then hopefully someday, if you're a pretty creative individual, you'll get an opportunity to create the terrain model for the MS3, depending on how your program works things. I always encourage my 1s and 2s to step up and ask if there's a sticks lane or maybe an evaluated lane during FTX where they can put that creativity and practice into actually applying it. Now, what should be displayed on your terrain model? There should always be a north-seeking arrow. You should have a scale. I don't see those very often, but you should have a scale on there if you have the time to add it. Of course, you can have your grid lines, which can be used with yarn or string, fishing wire. There's all kinds of different ways that you can create those grid lines. Of course, you should have your objective location marked. You should use the terrain that you can to show the exaggerated terrain relief and water obstacles in the map. You should have pieces that show where your friendly patrol locations are going to be. If you have targets, so like your target reference points for indirect fires, you need to put those on there as well, including the grid point and their label and the type of round that they're going to be. You want to indicate your routes, now both primary and alternate, because your primary may get compromised and you would have to utilize the alternate location or the alternate route. Now, planned release points include your ORP or your objective rally point, your link up release points, and any other release points. Those should also be marked on your terrain model somewhere. Any danger areas, or we call linear danger areas or LDAs, those include roads, trails, maybe some big open areas that is considered a danger area. Those should be marked as well. And when it's briefed, it should be the plan of how to cross those danger areas. You should have a legend. The legend especially is important if you're using colors or different things that don't correlate to what we typically expect them to be. And then you saw him talk about that large blow up, also called an inset model, that just covers the objective area. Now, the difference between just your regular terrain model and then that inset model is going to be that your terrain model is pretty stationary. It shows all the pieces and parts, but you may not move pieces through it as you're briefing the execution. However, in that inset model, that should be where pieces and parts are moving, and every single person should be told or shown or at least understand their role in that mission that you're conducting. All right, so what I want you to do now is take a moment, screenshot this, take a photo of it, and I'm going to have another slide here too. This is a large overlay. And on the next slide is going to be the inset. And what I want you to do, if you have the time, go collect up some resources, take the photos of this, and go get creative. Go exercise that creativity and see if you can create a 3D model of this exact overlay. So I'll leave this up for a few seconds. Again, this is the large scale area of operations. And then this here is going to be your inset model. So again, take a picture of this one if you'd like, go back, rewind, take photos or screenshots, and exercise your own creativity to see if you can recreate a terrain model based on a map overlay that you receive. All right, so let's close this out. I hope that now, at the end of this time with me, you feel more confident in explaining the advantages and disadvantages of verbal and written orders. Remember those things like how long it takes to distribute, how long it takes to bring people in, what you can include in both. I hope you understand the 3 types of orders, the WARNO, the OPORD, and the FRAGO. Remember the heads up, the order itself, and any changes or amendments. I hope you feel better explaining the operations order and its definition, as well as its purpose and the different characteristics that we look for with an OPORD. I hope you're able to remember those 5 paragraphs and what they include. Remember, situation is what's going on. The mission is what are we going to do. Execution is how are we going to do it. Sustainment is how do we get the supply and other things we need to accomplish this mission. And command and signal is your communications information. And now I hope that you're also able to understand the basics of assembling a full terrain model. If you have additional questions, I highly encourage you to reach out to your primary instructor and advisor, maybe a high-speed MS3 or MS4 to get those questions answered. And then if you still have questions, feel free to try to reach out to me depending on when you're watching this. You can still try to reach me at silver.beaty, B-E-A-T-Y, at mso.umt.edu, and I'll try to answer the questions or at least direct you into the right place to get them answered yourself. As always, thanks for sticking with me through this video. I'll see you in the next one.